I had to go to the shelter literally 20 minutes ago. Hezbollah is still shooting.
2 days after the ceasefire was announced, there are still missiles being fired at Israel from the northern border from Hezbollah. And that happened last night and it happened again today. Is that right?
It is correct. There is still a law in Lebanon that bans any negotiations with Israel. And right now, the president of Lebanon himself is the one that's breaking.
They can always rely on this brutal, fanatical support outside Iran to crack down on peaceful Iranian protesters. Using the wrong terminology has consequences, doesn't it, Nir?
No, I agree.
Do you think they want to see pro-Western, pro-Israeli, well-managed Iran? Or would they rather see a weakened Islamic Republic or even a failed state in Iran? My guest today is Dr. Nir Boms, Research Fellow at the Forum for Regional Cooperation and the Director of the Israel and the Middle East Program at Tel Aviv University. Nir is also a Fellow at the International Institute for Counter Terrorism. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Good to be here.
You were actually outside Israel when the recent war on Iran started on 28th of February this year, but you're back in Israel now. Did you think the war would last this long?
Not necessarily, although as it began, I had a sense that it will wait for me. And I'm speaking to you right now from the northern border, fairly close to where things are actually taking place.
And even though there's been a ceasefire, you messaged me yesterday that you've got to go to the shelter. So what was all that about?
Well, I had to go to the shelter literally 20 minutes ago. Hezbollah is still shooting. And one of the debates in the past 24 hours is whether the ceasefire will include Lebanon or will not include Lebanon. And that's in parallel to the fact that now Lebanon and Israel just announced that they will start again on a ceasefire, but maybe on other issues as well. But at least until now, the Northern Front is still very much active. I have seen a missile literally a few hundred meters from me, literally 20 minutes ago.
So even though we're 2 days after the ceasefire now, 2 days after the ceasefire was announced, there are still missiles being fired at Israel from the northern border from Hezbollah. And that happened last night and it happened again today. Is that right?
It is correct. And I think you can add to that the fact that there were drones attacking a Kuwaiti oil field. And it seemed that there were other attacks, in the Gulf. And it seems that the Hormuz Straits are not yet free for passage. So we are certainly speaking about a somewhat volatile ceasefire.
Okay, so Neil, what do you make of this ceasefire? How would you sum it up?
Well, it is only a beginning, but it's a phase. It's a phase in the war. We need to remember that eventually every campaign will have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Not always it will have a decisive end. I think we have seen less decisive ends for more wars, unfortunately, since the nature of war has changed. And it's not about just occupying territory. You need to deal with proxy groups, terrorist groups that hide inside population centers. It's more difficult to create decisive victories. We've seen that in Gaza as well. But I think in the context of what's happening right now and in the context of Iran, it's a very important point. It has to do also with the expectations of the US on the one hand, Israel on the other hand, and Iran. Iran wanted to create a scenario in where it prolongs the war so it can increase the pressure, the economic pressure on its surroundings and on the United States, so that it will push the United States to at some point begin to end the war. That's becoming less popular. That has been a big part of the Iranian strategy. But it seems that the US has been steadfast so far. And now we will have to see whether the negotiations in Pakistan will indeed show the amount of resolve and whether there's going to be an attempt of coming to terms with the Islamic Republic or whether there's not going to be coming to terms, in which case we'll see the resumptions of the war. It also seems that while Iran said that they will stop, they have not completely stopped. Their proxies have not been stopped completely. And when it comes to Lebanon, Iran attempted to create a linkage. And the Iranian demand was Israel needs to stop attacking Lebanon because we stopped attacking the United States or the Gulf partners. Israel said, we did not sign an agreement with Iran. The United States said, that is true. We have not negotiated that. And therefore, the Lebanese front remains open. Israel would like to see a position in where On the one hand, it continues to weaken Hezbollah, and on the other hand, there may be a negotiation path that potentially can bring a longer term resolution in where Lebanon is playing a more assertive role in preventing Hezbollah from a revival again. And we've seen the recent statement of Sheikh Naim Qassem, the leader of Hezbollah, warning Lebanon not to engage with Israel, not to go to negotiations. There is still a law in Lebanon that bans any negotiations with Israel. And right now, the president of Lebanon himself is the one that's breaking it.
So, would I be right in saying ceasefire is a convenient pause for both sides at the moment for various reasons? Because I look at the 10 points demand by Iran and I look at the 15-point demand by the US, and they seem to be as far apart from each other as they were before the war started. Don't see how the negotiations could come to an agreement during this ceasefire. What would you say to that?
Well, in the United States, we have President Trump that is known for being able to surprise us and then announcing a policy and then announcing perhaps something a little different, a day or two later. So in that context, I can say that everything is possible. But the gap between the two sides is significant. And I think the United States and Israel sees at least a big part of it eye to eye. And that also applies to many of the Gulf partners. They understand that they cannot tolerate a scenario in where the Islamic Republic continues to be a threat to control the straits, and also to be allowed to develop weapons that very likely will threaten the entire region again. I think one of the things that we've seen here, that the Gulf partners have seen here, is that the strategy of containing Iran did not work. Qatar very much attempted to do it, perhaps more than any others. They created a very expensive insurance policy, hosting American bases, hosting Hamas, having negotiated diplomatic relationship with Iran. They had supposed to have everything, making sure that they're not going to be damaged by any regional conflagration. It did not work. It did not work to any of the others, including all those who had diplomatic relations with Iran. Iran said, if I'm being attacked, hell break loose, and I'm going to go after all my former allies, because they're more allies of the United States or of Israel, and that cannot even be the case when it comes to countries like Qatar. So with the exceptions of Oman, that played a very interesting role here, the entire Gulf, Iran had open front with probably each and every country. It's unleashed its proxies in the same arenas, and right now we have a very significant pressure for the United States to say, even if you're going to reach an agreement of some sort, it needs to be an arrangement that will not allow the Iranian Islamic regime to function as it did. The Americans, President Trump at least had an interesting line, and he basically said, look, we are looking at a regime change. It's not exactly the regime change that we have envisioned, but it's not the same regime because these are not the same people. We have different people, and perhaps we can negotiate with them. The time will tell whether any of that will be reasonable, whether you can actually see a changed Islamic Republic. This is something that I think you can also comment on. This very rigorous ideological line of this regime is not likely to change. It may be coerced to a certain route for a bit, but it's not going to change. And then the bigger question is, what will happen in the meantime inside Iran? What will happen in the time where the airplanes are not flying above, where the dimensions of carnage are exposed, when many Iranians understand that if they're not going to help push for a change, what we'll see is another repeat of this. Iran will not be able to become great again, if I'm paraphrasing Trump. And we may see the continuation of this war that, although it's mainly aimed at at the Islamic Republic, at the Iranian regime, it's also caused a great deal of suffering to the Iranian people.
Yeah, and you mentioned about Trump's statements surprising everyone. And I think he made some big mistakes as well, because whereas the Israelis were always very careful about making a distinction between the people of Iran and the regime, the ruling regime, it looked like Trump didn't understand that. And in some of his tweets, he referred to threatening the nation of Iran. And then I think the worst one was one day before his promise of a big attack where he said it's going to destroy the Iranian civilization. And I think that made a lot of Iranians sort of like turn away from him, because that was very offensive to Iranians, to say that, someone's going to destroy their civilization, knowing that the Iranian civilization has not been destroyed throughout the history. It's 2,500-year history. Through the attacks, I mean, Iran's been invaded by the Greeks, by the Arabs, by the Turks, by the Mongols, but the civilization has carried on. And it's a very emotive issue for Iranians. Making statements like that, I think, was a textbook in how to lose friends and allies. Do you
Yeah,
think he's
well,
being advised correctly, or do you think he's just sort of like trigger happy with posting things on social media?
Well, granted, Potkin, the Iranian civilization is stronger and has a much longer tenure than the Islamic Republic of Iran, and that's probably one of the most important differentiation that what one should make for those who believe in the Iranian civilizations and the Iranian people, rather than at the Iranian Islamic regime. I think that President Trump had made this differentiation before, and I think part of his angry tweets sometimes he simply is being carried away. I don't think he misses this point completely.
Using the wrong terminology has consequences, doesn't it, Nir?
No, I agree. I agree. It's not up to me to correct the president of the United States of how he uses his X or Truth Social account, to be more precise. But
Still, and he's
he
still
certainly has a certain style that does not always leave a lot of room for nuance.
and he still even refers to Khamenei as Khomeini sometimes. It makes you think, like, this guy, does he have all the right information? It's not, doesn't create a good image of him for people in Iran. And I think a lot of Iranians, I mean, and definitely those who oppose the regime to begin with, they were very supportive of him. But I've seen in the recent days they're turning away from him. Moving on to other issues, regime change was one of the things that a lot of people were looking forward to. And they thought that the regime change means the end of the Islamic Republic, the creation of a new secular democratic regime in Iran. A lot of people were hoping on the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi to be reinstated. But now they're talking about, as you mentioned, regime change meaning just a different version of the regime, the regime evolving into something else. What options are they talking about? Is there I mean, for years, people looked for a moderate faction in Iran, and that didn't lead to anything. Um, why would the war have changed anything?
Well, I would first say that I think we need to suspend this question for a little longer, because I'm not sure that this is over yet. I think, and you may have some thoughts about this as well, Potkin, as an astute observer of the dynamics inside Iran, that there's going to be significant dynamics inside the country, both inside the political circles and outside the political circles. At the time where it's clear that there is flames are no longer in the air, and the people can begin to focus on the quote unquote day after, or at least the beginning of a day after, if indeed a ceasefire will materialize. And I think there are many questions there, because just like in Lebanon, we have the same argument. You need to choose between Lebanon and Hezbollah. I think the people of Iran also very much understand. They understood it years ago. This is why they went into the streets. Do we need to make a choice between an Islamic Republic that chooses war over any other priority, or do we want to choose prosperity in the future, and stability in our country and food on our plates? And I think that this war had shown many more that they need an alternative, and that this regime, that again its supporters came to celebrate the ceasefire and celebrate the victory, and vow to continue the war, is not the alternative that the majority of Iranians still seek. And therefore, that dynamic inside the country, I'm not sure if it's over yet, although certainly the circle of the regime supporters that had also a monopoly of arms were able to still sustain the upper hand, and create this reality in where this question of regime change at least was postponed. What will happen inside the political circles, whether the mysterious Khamenei Jr., Mr. Mujtaba, will surface, or whether some of the other names that now are maybe more involved in negotiations will begin to have play a slightly different flute, is yet to be seen. I think that so far what we have seen is that the Revolutionary Guard wing and the more aggressive conservative faction of the Revolutionary Guards, this is the wing that actually leads the nominees for the new positions, the ministerial positions and the cabinet positions. But this is all relatively fresh and relatively new. And I would like to assume that underneath the surface, there are certainly other questions. And perhaps we will, in the next, few weeks or months, depending of how the dynamic will continue, we will see another wave, either of inside political dynamic or outside political dynamic, that will continue to challenge the system. This is not a system that is acceptable to the majority of Iranians. It's difficult to understand the numbers. And of course, the regime supporters can at this point claim the upper hand, but not necessarily because they have the majority behind them, but because they have the monopoly of arms behind them. And whether that will change, whether some of the ideas of pushing this regime in a different way will materialize, time will tell. But I think your people and the Iranian civilization. And I think part of that has to do with why there are many Iranians who would like to see the continuation of the Iranian civilization, and in that sense, putting an end for the Islamic regime.
I mean, I completely agree with you that the vast majority of Iranians want to see a change. They want to see the end of this regime. I would actually put the number of the regime supporters inside Iran at 10%. Maybe if I want to give a bit, give a little bit more, maybe I'll put it to 15%, but really no more than that. However, the problem is, how do we get rid of this regime? If it comes to a violent revolution, my problem is that I've come to this understanding that after 5 major uprisings being brutally suppressed, is that violence is their playing field. It's not our playing field. We can never get as brutal as them when it comes to violence. Ever since I've known this regime, they thrive on crisis. They thrive on conflict. They thrive on war. Where they actually are weak is during peacetime, in managing the country during peacetime. And also another thing, Nir, that makes it difficult to overthrow this regime with a violent revolution is that people forget. I mean, I said about 10% of the population support the regime. That's inside Iran. The problem is there's actually more support for the regime outside Iran amongst the Shia populations that are normally a persecuted minority in Sunni states like in Pakistan, like in Afghanistan, or the Shia majority in Bahrain who are ruled by a Sunni government and they think that they should be ruling it, or in Iraq where they're no longer a persecuted minority, but the fact that they're in charge now, they say that's because of Iran. So they look at the regime in Iran as their savior, and they're the most fanatical supporters of the regime, which can unleash extreme brutality. I mean, we've had many reports about the Shia proxy groups from Iraq, in Iran, carrying out the most brutal crackdowns. We've got the Fatimian brigades, which are the Afghan Shias, the Zainabian brigade, which are the Pakistani Shias. They can always rely on this brutal, fanatical support outside Iran to crack down on peaceful Iranian protesters. So 90% of the population want a regime change, but they think that they're not strong enough to be able to do it through a violent revolution, which is why, at least in the beginning, they were supporting the outside intervention, particularly after that massacre that happened in January. But if we're being realistic, are there other ways that they can carry out this regime change?
Look, the quintessential debate in the entire Middle East is between those that on the one side would like to see the dynamic led by Sunnis versus Shias, Jews versus Muslims, Israelis versus Arabs, East versus West, and those who believe that we can actually overcome some of this and work together in a sense of an Abrahamic covenant, alluding to the Abraham Accords and the dynamics of partnerships, cooperation, with the notion that tolerance can exist, it can lead to peace, and peace can lead to prosperity. Those who believe in win-lose, the axis of resistance, and Iran has championed that axis, would very much like to see that these types of conflicts, and they thrive on these conflicts, and these conflicts are holy for them, and they need to support them and win. Iran may have overstepped a little bit because right now its entire neighborhood is in conflict with it. And rather than trading with it, it will now begin to boycott it more. There were, I think, over 5,000 Iranian companies just in Dubai, and the UAE have just shut down a lot of their activities with the understanding that a lot of that came directly into IRGC and Iranian regime circles, and they just simply wanted to distance them and put them away. None of this will eventually help the economy of Iran or the prosperity of Iran, and that will percolate in a sense of pressure.
Yeah, and talking about the regional countries, especially within the Persian Gulf, the Arab states within the Persian Gulf, do you think they want to see pro-Western, pro-Israeli, well-managed Iran, or would they rather see a weak and Islamic Republic or even a failed state in Iran?
I think that at the beginning there were two views that I've heard. There was one view which sometimes we've heard from our friends in the Gulf saying, look, we were able to live with our Iranian neighbors. We don't always agree with them, but we've been doing this for over 1,500 years, even with the Islamic Republic. Perhaps there's going to be a way that you, speaking to me as an Israeli, will be able to also do that. Perhaps we can find a way to mediate between the sides and find a way that you will be able to not necessarily to agree, but just find a way to limit the borders of conflict. For that, we were always responded with, a big question mark. What do you mean by that? This is an ideological regime that doesn't seem to compromise or budge. But that was one response. And the second response was, well, we don't like them. We are afraid that they will explode. So if they're going to get weaker, a bit more pressure, maybe that's okay. But I think that after this war, when they realized that they've exploded, that they did not hesitate to send their drones and rockets and missiles all over the Gulf, and Iran opened 12 different fronts, and they shot their former allies. I mean, they've shot Turkey, and then they've shot they've shot Qatar and then the Gulf partners who have been trading with them, who have diplomatic relations with them. And they realized that they cannot allow the continuation of this scenario where they're going to this particular regime who ideologically is ripe and ready to use everything they have in order to create just a punitive measure against a war launched by another partner. And they are willing to sacrifice everything. And of course, taking, a lot of assets that are extremely important for the Gulf partners. So they basically are saying, listen, we're not willing to tolerate the continuation of this regime. And if this regime needs to be there, we certainly need to make sure that it's going to be very weak and very stifled so that they won't be able to threaten us, certainly not in the near or intermediate future, and hopefully not forever.
And as I said in the beginning, you were actually out of Israel when the war happened. Tell us where you were and what you were up to and what the situation was where you were.
Well, I've been in a number of countries, including in the region and in Turkey and in Jordan. And I had a chance to meet some colleagues and partners. This was actually scheduled before the war. This is something that I do regularly. My schedule was disrupted a bit. The airport was closed. But I had a chance to speak and meet people and partners from the region, exchange some views with them as things continue to evolve, feel some of the alarms in where I was. I remember when I was in Jordan, and all of a sudden I'm in the middle of a missile attack and realizing how difficult it is for my colleagues there who are really not used to it. They don't have shelters, they don't have the procedures or the routines. And therefore, although they had relatively less attacks, the number of casualties sometimes have been more significant because they just don't have the way to create a shelter. In the Gulf, there are hardly bomb shelters. There are lots of shining buildings from glass that is part of the signature symbol of places like Dubai. And of course, that's the most welcoming environment for a drone or for a missile to really create damage. And following all of these conversations, I certainly can repeat what I've said, that the regional partners had the reality check. They had the reality check that they containment of Iran, that strategy of containment can no longer survive. They realize that they were not taking into consideration the extent of the Iranian will to really break hell loose and to really bomb everything, including their allies. And they realize that they're not prepared enough. They realize something else. Places like Dubai and the UAE, particularly, but also Saudi Arabia and the other countries in the Gulf, have created a post-oil economy, attempted to do that. Iran, of course, have damaged the oil. Part of that is to do with tourism, with trade, with bringing people to create businesses, to invest there, because that's a safe place. That's a place in where you can create your company, you can create your office, you don't have high taxes, and you have security, and you can live in relative freedom. And all of a sudden, Iran began to challenge all of that. And this is something which is a threat, which is a very deep threat, much beyond a particular oil field or a particular building that is damaged. This is a long-term threat for the entire economic stability of some of these countries. And this is something that they're not going to be taken for granted. This is something that gets them to really push the United States right now in this phase of negotiations. And then it will most probably will continue to create an arms race and purchase procurements of weapons and building of bomb shelters, with the realization that this is something that may be needed. But if you want to avoid some of that, what you need to do, and that may be to some degree the safer or may even be the cheaper strategy for the long term, is to make sure that the source of the threat, and there's only at this point one source of the threat, that the source of the threat will be no longer. And this is why I think right now the Gulf countries broadly in unison are really pushing the United States to make sure that whatever they're doing in Pakistan is not going to bring back the threat of the Iranian Islamic regime.
Another development to this war has been the taxing the oil tankers that pass through the Straits of Hormuz. Now, my understanding is that Iran wants to charge $1 a barrel for every oil tanker that passes through the Straits of Hormuz, and it's actually seeking the payments to be in either Bitcoin or stable cryptocurrency like the USDT, and also the USD1, which I'm told is the Trump family cryptocurrency. What do you think of that? And do you think they will be able to put this charge on the oil tankers that pass through the Straits of Hormuz? Do you think they'd be able to turn this into a source of revenue? I'm told it's going to, if it's actually implemented, it's going to bring about $72 billion a year revenue for Iran. Do you think they'd be able to exercise that?
I believe that if the result of this war will be that rather than crippling further the Iranian Islamic regime, will have a result that will actually rebuild its economy and will punish other Gulf partners by closing international waterways. It's going to be, I don't think that the Gulf partners will accept it. I very much doubt that the US will accept it, because this is really the exact opposite of even the stated goals of this war. So I very much hope that that's not even going to be a part of the negotiation table. I can certainly understand why the Iranians would like to see it. They would say, listen, somebody opened the war and they need to pay us. Would not, of course, consider paying any other countries for the ongoing damages that they've caused to all the surrounding region. But from the point of view of the Gulf, of the United States, not to mention Israel, this would be really a catastrophic result, because what it means is that this particular regime, with its intention, not only can declare a degree of victory, but also create an additional stream of income that will most likely be channeled, as we have seen, to these types of operations that will really bring about the next war. So I very much hope that all of that discourse is a part of negotiation technique and a part of, in a way, internal PR campaign that no one, certainly in the US, will take it seriously when it comes to the negotiations.
So just to end our conversation, Nir, I know you're busy. What do you think is going to happen in the next few days, and what is the longer term outlook, and anything else that you want to add?
So the next few days will be interesting for sure. I think we will see whether we'll have a serious discourse in Pakistan, whether it will actually start in a serious way or it will collapse very quickly. And there are certainly plenty of reasons why it may collapse, starting from the fact that some of the proxies are not really listening to the ceasefire, continuing with the fact that the Lebanon question is remains open for the Iranians. It needs to completely stop. For the Israelis and the Americans, it's just a side issue that's not related to the main negotiations. And as you've said, there are significant gaps in the demands. And if the Iranians will bring to the table somewhat of a ridiculous or demands that are a non-starter, the Americans can simply say, okay, we're not able to live with it. On the other hand, there may be a scenario Trump is the deal maker, and that something will be serious, and they will attempt to create an agreement. The American demands are, I think, more in line with really stifling and limiting the Iranian regime, the Islamic regime, when it comes to activities related not only to nuclear, but also to missiles and proxies. Of course, the assumption is that even if there's going to be an agreement, it's not necessarily that there's going to be full compliance, but there's going to be a way to put some checks and balances on some of that. And then there may be a way to gradually move into a new status quo in the region. In the meantime, we need to look at the other arenas, certainly the Lebanese arena. And here we actually have a chance to create negotiations between Israel and Lebanon, something that did not happen for over 40 years. We've had the first official meeting between a Lebanese and an Israeli just a few months ago in January. And now we're having an actual track of negotiations. Hezbollah is very much pushing against it, but it's about to happen irrespective of Hezbollah. And that again puts this discussion of what should Lebanon choose? Should Lebanon choose a war and Hezbollah, or maybe peace and reconciliation? A very interesting dynamic. And that can continue in a way parallel to the dynamic with the main negotiations. And in the meantime, we'll see whether we're going to have some more violations. Likely, as we've seen before, it's going to be very difficult to keep everybody at bay. And there's going to be some violation. If there's going to be some violation, there's going to be an attempt to potentially get back to a cycle of not necessarily a war, but if there's going to be more violations, then very well, we may have a third round. So the next few days will be very interesting. I do not personally anticipate that all will go smoothly, that we'll have an agreement and all of it will end. I think it will take some time, and it's not unlikely that we'll see another round of conflagration in one of the arenas, either in Iran, in the region, or in Lebanon.
Thank you very much, Nir. Thanks for that. As always, it's good to listen to your point of view and your experience and your knowledge, not just about Israel, but the region. And let's hope to talk again in a few days, few weeks' time, and see where we are. But hopefully, we'll get to the point that you and I want, which is the people in this region just getting along with each other and helping each other to become more prosperous rather than just fighting and killing each other. Thanks, Neil.
Amen for that. And I hope we'll have a quiet weekend for all of us.